ceistena agus freigrí tásúla agam ón ara an aramara bia agus talvíochta agus an arnál iscuachta freis gur mágin. Minister, thank you. 15 minutes.
Thank you. Last Concorda. First of all, before I start today, I want to pay tribute and extend my sympathies to the family of late Hugo Boyle, CEO of the Irish South and East Fish Producers Organisation, who passed away on Tuesday. He was a tremendous champion for our fishing sector and for fishermen. He was a man of tremendous integrity and dignity and accomplishment, and a tremendous family man and a tremendous professional as well. And I know on behalf of myself, the department and everyone here in the Dáil, I want to extend my sympathy to his family, to his wife Ellen, his children and wider family, and also to his many colleagues who valued him very dearly. As you're all aware, last Concorda, fisheries was one of the most difficult areas of negotiations around the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. The EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement will, unfortunately, have a negative impact on our fishing industry. However, this impact would have been far greater had the Barnier Task Force agreed to UK demands for, or indeed had we been in a no-deal scenario, which would have seen all EU vessels barred from UK waters and their subsequent displacement into Ireland's fishing zone. While the outcome on fisheries was a difficult compromise, I can assure you that the Government will work to ensure that the fisheries sector and the coastal communities that depend on it are supported through the period ahead. Last week I published a preliminary analysis of reduction of fisheries quota shares under the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which details level of quota transfers for Ireland across the different stocks. This compares the quota shares allocated to Ireland in 2020 and the corresponding quota shares for 2021 to 2026. The quota reductions are to be spread out until 2026, and the aggregate final quota transfer by Ireland is estimated to be €43 million by that time, which amounts to a 15% reduction compared to the overall value of the 2020 Irish quotas. However, the upfront change for 2021 is very sizable at around 60%. These reductions across the different stocks will be felt immediately by our fishing industry when the full annual quotas for 2021 are determined in March. On key Western mackerel stock, our quota share reduces from our current 21% in 2020 to 18% for 2021, and this will reduce to 16% by 2025. This represents a 26% transfer of our quota to the UK by 2025. In Ireland's largest fishery for whitefish fleet, which is nephrops or prawns, in Area 7, our quota share reduces from our current 37% to 34% in 2021 and is reduced to 32% in 2025, and this represents a 14% transfer of our quota by 2025. There are also notable reductions in many other whitefish stocks. These include substantial reductions in the whitefish quotas off the northwest and west of Scotland to such important stocks such as haddock, which has a 23% transfer, magrum, which is a 19% transfer, and monkfish, which is a 20% transfer. The analysis of reduction of fisheries quota shares document also shows that Ireland contributed approximately 15% of the total value of our 2020 fisheries quotas to the agreement. For other Member States, this figure is considerably less. The quota transfers required of Ireland are clearly disproportionate, and the outcome is inequitable in terms of burden sharing. The analysis that my experts have undertaken and which is published on the Government website clearly demonstrates this inequitable burden placed on Ireland. Just yesterday, I met with Michel Barnier, the EU Fisheries Commissioner Sine Vicious, and the Ministers of the Fisheries Group of Member States in relation to fisheries matters post-Brexit. At that meeting, I made it clear that Ireland considers the transfer to the UK involves a very high share of some of our most important stocks. I pointed out that within the common fisheries policy, Ireland contributes by providing rich fishing grounds for our EU member states and our exclusive economic zone, provides spawning and nursery grounds on many of the core stocks on which are then shared with the UK and on which the trade and cooperation quota package and the common fisheries policy depend. I also strongly express my disappointment that the principle of burden sharing within the EU member states has not been adequately respected. I made clear that the inequitable relative contribution of quota share by Ireland is contributing to a strong sense of grievance within our fishing industry and indeed more broadly. I pushed strongly that a mechanism must be found within the EU Commission and relevant member states to find solutions. I intend to continue to keep the focus on this situation and use any opportunity available to seek constructive solutions that would help alleviate this unacceptable position. UK vessels, including Northern Ireland vessels, have had a pattern of landings into many Irish ports prior to the UK leaving the EU last Concórla. Many of these vessels are based in Irish ports despite being registered in Northern Ireland. Following a detailed examination and consultation with the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority, I decided to designate 5 additional Irish ports for UK-registered Northern Ireland vessels, landings for both illegal, unregulated and unreported legislation, and also for North East Atlantic Fisheries Commission requirements. The 5 new ports designated are Rossaveel, Howth, Greencastle, Rathmullen and Burton Port, and these join Killybegs and Castletownbere, which continue to be designated for landings from vessels of any third country origin. I have notified the EU Commission to ensure that the necessary notifications and requirements are in place to have these ports operational from the start of February 2021. Under the new designations, Rossaveel and Howth will be able to accommodate landings of demersal fish from vessels under 26 metres and will operate Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Greencastle, Rathmullen and Burton Port will be designated for non-quota species landings from vessels under 18 metres and will operate from 2 to 8 p.m. Monday to Friday. From the 1st of January 2021, the United Kingdom is a third country and subject to IUU legislation and NEFC requirements. And this means that any UK, including Northern Ireland, registered vessel must comply with third country landing requirements when landing in the EU, including Irish ports, and is a direct result, unfortunately, of Brexit and is included in the Protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland. Up until a conclusion of an agreement on the future relationship between the EU and the UK on Christmas Eve, it remained unclear whether Northern Ireland vessels that had access to Irish waters will continue to do so. The designation of these extra ports is an important decision which will allow fishers and small vessels to continue their livelihoods following Brexit. It is important at Lascancurla now more than ever to support our fishers and fishing communities and to do all we can to help them continue their livelihoods. To touch on the issue of a topic of authorisations to fish in UK waters, and first of all in relation to voisinage arrangements for the 0 to 6 nautical mile zone in Northern Ireland, Lascancurla. Last night I met with Minister Edwin Poots, the Northern Irish Agriculture and Fisheries Minister, to discuss the implications that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement has had on the fishing industry for both Irish and for Northern Irish registered vessels. I have confirmed with the Commission that the voisinage arrangements can continue as before. However, the new UK Fisheries Act 2020 will require Irish vessels to obtain a licence to access the Northern Ireland 0 to 6 nautical mile zone. Northern Ireland vessels will similarly require an authorisation under EU regulations to continue to fish in Ireland's 0 to 6 nautical mile zone. The work to authorise EU vessels to fish in the UK waters before the 1st of January 2021 was very challenging, especially given the short window between the conclusion of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and the start of the new year. My department has worked closely with the EU Commission to ensure that fishing vessels that traditionally fished in UK waters were granted access by the UK authorities. The temporary authorisations granted to 220 vessels expires tonight. some of the additional data being requested by the UK to issue full licences has caused difficulties, and there is uncertainty as to when the UK will issue annual licences for all of the 220 vessels already authorised. In order to avoid a situation that vessels fishing at present in UK waters will be operating without a UK permission, my department is issuing temporary authorisations for a further 3 weeks. This arrangement has been agreed between the EU Commission and the UK authorities, and the UK will publish a list of the vessels operating under the temporary licence. This will give time to ensure that all UK demands are met and annual licences are issued by the UK and by EU authorisations issued by my department. The focus to date has been on vessels that have in the past 2 years fished in UK waters, or on operators who request an authorisation to fish in UK waters. However, given our geographical proximity to the UK and to its waters, we have sought that all our fleet be granted access by the UK to their water. My department will continue, Alaska and Corla, to work to maximise the number of vessels granted access, and in the most timely manner possible. On the 25th of December 2020, the European Commission published a proposal for an EU regulation establishing a Brexit adjustment reserve. The objective of the proposed BAR is to provide support to counter the adverse consequences of the withdrawal of the UK from the European Union in Member States, regions and sectors, in particular those that are worst affected by that withdrawal, and to mitigate the related impact on the economic, social and territorial cohesion. The draft regulation is subject to negotiations in the Council and European Parliament, and its provisions may change. It is proposed that the BAR would have a budget of €5.37 billion in current prices, and approximately €1 billion would be allocated to Ireland in 2021 as pre-financing to assist Ireland in funding appropriate measures in 21 and 22 to assist the worst affected sectors of our economy. Government is very aware that our food sector, not least our fisheries sector, is particularly impacted by the outcome of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and is examining how best to deploy Ireland's proposed allocation under the reserve to help our economy adjust to the new arrangements. I have listened carefully last Corla to representatives of the industry, and indeed I have met individual fishermen who are facing a very difficult situation. I have reflected on how to ensure that the funding made available to the sector in the BAR is focused to meet the challenges of the sector and of the coastal communities most impacted. I am minded to set up a task force involving seafood industry representatives and representatives of other stakeholders to provide recommendations on the appropriate measures that will best support the sector and the local coastal communities. I intend to set out in the arrangements in terms of reference for this task force later this week. I will ask the task force to immediately focus on possible arrangements for a temporary fleet tie-up scheme to counter the impacts of the reduction in quotas, which will impact from the beginning of April. When the task force has recommended on a tie-up scheme and it is implemented, it would provide short-term assistance to fishing vessels most impacted by the quota arrangements, with the UK kicking in the second quarter of the year. The task force will, I hope, Alaska and Corla, provide recommendations on a range of other actions and measures that will allow the sector and the coastal communities to adjust and develop so as to counter both direct and downstream impacts of the wider seafood sector and coastal communities. I look forward to further engagement with members here during this session and to working with everyone and with the sector in the time ahead. Thank you, Alaska and Corla.
Deputy Matt Carthy sharing with Deputy Pádraig MacLochlainn. 10 minutes.
I'll take 5, Cairloch, and have a couple of questions that hopefully the Minister will have time to address. Minister, thank you for your contribution here today. There's no two ways of looking at this. Whatever people's views in relation to the overall Brexit package, and most, I think, if not all members of this House would argue that in the main a good deal was negotiated insofar as was possible on behalf of Ireland. But putting that aside, looking at this from a fisheries perspective, this was an incredibly bad deal for Ireland. And it's not the first time that Irish fisher communities have been the losers in our interactions with the European Union. Transfers to Britain as a result of this deal are going to disproportionately impact on Ireland, some 42 million out of the total of €182 million. That's not fair, Minister. I don't think anybody would accept or even argue that it is fair. So the big question that I would like to get an initial response from you, Minister, is do you accept that there now needs to be an overall re-evaluation of the common fisheries policy? And if you do accept that, and I hope you do, because I think anybody looking at this objectively would accept that it is absolutely required, that the quota across the board that Ireland receives is absolutely pathetic when you consider that we're the largest island in Europe and our proportion of quota does not in any way come to reflect that. Do you agree that this needs to be an all-government approach? We know if an Irish fisheries minister goes to their council meeting and suggests a reopening of the common fisheries policy, they'll be laughed out of the room. This can only be dealt with effectively if it's dealt with at a head of government level and if it's dealt with as a government priority. And in other words, that we tell the European Union that we're not accepting any further treaty change until there's a re-evaluation of the common fisheries policy. And my second question to you, Minister, is do you now accept that at a very minimal there needs to be a junior minister with responsibilities for fisheries and the marine? I'm not casting aspersions on your own dedication to this area, but this is a crucial area for so many communities, for our domestic economy, particularly in coastal communities, that it requires, in my view, a hands-on approach. We need a minister with dedicated responsibility. I want to know, do you agree with that, and will you bring that to Cabinet for consideration?
Thank you very much, Deputy Carthy, for your contribution there, and I think you certainly outlined in a measured way how the overall agreement is a positive outcome in terms of the wider economy, but as I've said myself, the impact from the fishing sector, that there is a significant impact to the fishing sector, albeit not what it might have been in the event of a no deal, and not what certainly it wasn't what the British government were looking for, nor indeed what it was that was sold to their fishermen in terms of in advance of the Brexit vote, or indeed since that either. I've outlined very clearly in my own contribution the disproportionate burden in terms of the quota reallocation that is happening as a result of the outcome of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. That's one I will be taking at every level possible to Europe. It's one also we have at every level of government communicated to the European Commissioner view on, and certainly in the upcoming EU Fish Council meetings I will be very strongly reinforcing that, and likewise in the run-up to the next the review of the Common Fisheries Policy, which will take place throughout the end of this year into next year. It's one I will be making very clear as well, and my clear objective and the government's clear objective will be trying to ensure in terms of the review of the Common Fisheries Policy a strong outcome in terms of the allocation of quota to Ireland and the best possible result from that. So, and I know that's something that would be shared across all parties, and certainly an objective within the fisheries sector as well. In relation to your second point, in relation to a junior minister for fisheries, I certainly have been honoured and glad over the last number of weeks, and certainly from the very outset when I was appointed as Minister for the Marine, to be a full Cabinet Minister and at the Cabinet table at all times as we prepared for Brexit, as we made sure everything possible could be done in advance, and particularly as well as we negotiated and put forward the strongest possible national position throughout the process, and likewise since then in terms of being present at Cabinet at all times, and also in terms of my engagement with counterparts at European level. And I think that full Cabinet status for Marine has been more important than ever at this very critical juncture for the marine sector, and certainly particularly my own county being one that is more that has more of a stake in this than any county. I have, as a Donegal man, been glad to be in a position to engage with so many fishermen
thank you, Minister.
and to represent their interests as a full
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to
Minister.
move on to Deputy Pádraig MacLochlainn.
Gordon Maggart, last Cairns. Minister, you will have been engaged in extensive discussions with fishers around the coast, so you know better than most the disaster that they see this deal as. Remember, this was an industry already struggling. I met with the Foyle Fishermen's Co-op yesterday online, and they advised me that the threat to jobs in Donegal alone is as many as 400 jobs on the back of this appalling deal. And you know that our fishing industry acted in good faith, working with other member states, fishing representatives, and they were shafted, absolutely shafted here. The burden that the Irish fishing industry has been asked to take is absolutely shocking. They don't want financial compensation. They want to fish the abundance of fish in the waters around our country. So I want to ask you, because your government voted down an amendment from Sinn Féin yesterday that asked you and mandated you to go back and renegotiate the common fisheries policy to ensure that our Irish fishing industry gets a fair share of the fish in our waters. You voted down that very carefully worded motion. So I'm going to ask you now, will you seek to renegotiate the common fisheries policy to get a fair share of the fish in Irish waters for our fishing industry?
I've made it very clear, Deputy MacLochlainn, in my contribution so far, my absolute determination in terms of the following on from the trade and cooperation agreement and the unfair burden that is in our fishing quotas as a result of that, which is more significant proportionately than other member states have to carry. We do know, of course, from the outset, the grave danger our fishing sector was in. The grave danger and no deal presented for it, given the fact that 1/3 of all our fish, all our Irish national fish, is caught in UK waters, 1/3. And also the fact that if we were blocked from those waters, the other EU fleet, including our own, that fishes in British waters, would have been displaced into our waters. And the grave and drastic implications that a no deal would have had from a fisheries point of view. We fought tooth and nail, Deputy MacLochlainn, working right alongside the fishing sector domestically, right throughout the negotiation process, to ensure that fisheries was prioritised at all time and to hold the strongest line possible. And that was obviously resulted in fisheries being the very last issue being dealt with, because we were fighting so hard on it and doing everything we could to put forward the strongest possible argument. The British, as you know, the government were looking to take back all the fish the EU fleet, including our own, catches in their waters, the zonal attachment principle. They're looking to take back all of that, 100% of that. We didn't want to give any of it, but the ultimate deal resulted in 25% of what the EU fleet, including our own, catches in UK waters being reallocated between now and 2026. That's not an outcome any of us wanted, but unfortunately it was a result, and the best case scenario, the best possible result we were able to get, given the challenge of those negotiations. So while they wanted 100%, they ended up getting 25%. It's 25% too much from our point of view, but as I say, it did avoid a no-deal scenario, which would have been drastic and catastrophic for our fishery sector. And I now, as Minister for Marine, working with all my government colleagues, will continue at European level to try and address the unfair burden that's in that, and also in terms of the review of the common fisheries policy, to put forward Ireland's case and what we bring to the common fisheries policy, and to do everything I can and the government can to have that reflected in the policy as well.
Okay. You're before the Agriculture and Marine Committee tomorrow, so we'll develop this conversation tomorrow. I want to ask, with the limited time I have left, Rockall. As you know, the naval authorities of Britain have prevented Donegal fishing boats from accessing the crucial waters around Rockall, particularly the 0 to 12 limit. For example, Foyle Fishermen's Co-op, as you would know, derives about 1/4 of their income from those fishing grounds around Rockall. It's absolutely essential to their survival. Can you give us an update on the negotiations with the British government, and will you defend the right of Donegal fishermen and Irish fishermen to fish in those grounds?
It's the end. Sorry, Minister, there is no time for a response. I'm sorry, you're going to have to give a written... No, yeah. Could I finish a sentence to the Minister, please? Thank you. Could I finish my sentence to the Minister? There is a set time here, Minister. It's not your fault. and I'm going to suggest that you give a written response. Written before me is Sinn Féin. 10 minutes in total for questions and answers. That time is now up. Okay? Now. Well, then we'll come to that when your slot comes, or you can give up that slot now. No, I am not. I am not negotiating time with you. There's a business committee. Go back to the business committee. If your next colleague wants to do it, I'm moving on to the Realtas. Back to the Realtas. You're out of order. I've given you time. I'm going back to the government and 2 speakers with 9 minutes. Deputy Stephen Matthews and Deputy Christopher O'Sullivan. I beg your pardon. In that confusion, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I missed Pádraig MacLochlainn Deputy Noel Sherlock. Gumaleshkel.
Thank you, Orla.
Yeah, I took off my glasses. I was reading Gumaleshkel.
And I say this in the best spirit possible. I don't think it's the first time that that's happened on Pádraig MacLochlainn.
Well, if you want to use your 5 minutes like that, go ahead. I don't mind, but I'll be bringing down the bell at 5 minutes. Use it any way you like.
Yeah. Could I, in the short time that's open to me, I too would share with Deputy MacLochlainn in relation to the question around Rockall. It would be good to have some clarity on that. And that's my first question. And I only have 4.5 minutes left. So a 1 minute answer would suffice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Sherlock and Deputy MacLochlainn. Certainly, I'm very much aware, and the government are very much aware of the importance of the 0 to 12 mile zone off Rockall for our fishermen. Our position is resolute in that we have a strong tradition of fishing in that area. We continue and will continue to hold that position, and we're engaging diplomatically with the Scottish Government at the moment in relation to trying to find a resolution to the issue that there's been in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you, Minister. I welcome the reply and we look forward to hearing about progress on that matter. The Minister has mentioned the idea of a temporary fleet tie-up scheme in the context of the £1 billion Brexit Adjustment Fund. I want to ask the Minister, is he giving consideration to a decommissioning scheme? And if so, will he include the smaller vessels that would have been excluded, which were under the 18-metre threshold, in such a scheme? Because we want to ensure that if such a scheme is being considered from that £1 billion, that smaller boats would be included in that as well.
Thank you, Deputy Sherlock. The Government are very clear in our commitment to stand ready to support the sector to address the impact that the sector has seen as a result of the outcome of the agreement, both in terms of representing our interests in Europe and trying to address the burden share as part of that, but also particularly as well in terms of financially trying to assist to address the impact both in terms of the sector and also in terms of coastal communities. Part of that will be consideration certainly in the short term around a temporary fleet tie-up scheme, and I will be consulting with the industry and the sector as well in relation to how any impacts can be addressed in the long term. And as I outlined in my initial contribution, my intention around that regard is to set up a task force to get and ensure that there is full engagement and all ideas from the sector and from those who are affected and from coastal communities properly and fully feed into that and inform that approach.
It would appear from the Minister's reply that he has not given consideration to the idea of a decommissioning scheme. I would ask, frankly, because I think it's important for us to be honest with people in fishing communities as well, and there will be those who will avail of a decommissioning scheme if it is appropriately funded and funded to the point whereby people would buy into it. And I think it's something that should be put on the table. I think it's important for us to be honest with fishing communities as well. The fact of the matter is that the consequence of this deal and the loss of quota is going to have an impact, particularly on smaller inshore vessels. And let's be honest with fishermen about that. So I would ask, please, that the Minister would give me a clear answer in respect of whether or not he will consider the idea of a commissioning scheme, and particularly in favour of smaller vessels throughout our coastal communities in the context of this £1 billion fund.
Just over a minute to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Laskin Corla. I think the outcome of the agreement, which in total, Deputy Sherlock, involves a transfer of quota or national quota of 15% between now and 2026 affects all vessels of all sizes. It's particularly the two species most affected is mackerel, for example, and also in the whitefish sector prawns, but also species like haddock, monk, megrim as well. So it's going to affect many vessels. And certainly, as I said, the government are fully cognizant and stand fully ready to support the sector to address all of the outcomes in that. In the short term, that will be about a temporary fleet tie-up scheme. And yes, certainly we have looked and examined in terms of all contingencies, including the possibility for decommissioning. But I'm very much keen to engage with the sector in relation to how we go about that, because they're the ones that are implemented, they're the ones that know how they're going to be impacted, and they're the ones I want to inform how they be supported and how we can grow and ensure a sustainable fishery sector, and one that is healthy into the future and can address the impact we've seen, unfortunately, from Brexit.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy. Moving on to Deputy Stephen Matthews and Christopher O'Sullivan. Is that 4.5 minutes each?
Thanks, last County Order. Yeah, I'll be sharing the 9 minutes with Deputy O'Sullivan. Minister, our fishers and our fishing communities are going through a very tough and stressful time, as you've outlined in your opening statement, and other deputies have referred to here today as well. And despite the Brexit deal, there are still many uncertainties. It's my understanding that we still don't know exactly the quotas and the total allowable catch that will be shared amongst the sector, or what the sustainability criteria that will be applied to that. We can't guarantee the scientific advice on sustainable fishing will be applied to UK waters, and there's indication that the UK is preparing to invest heavily in refitting their fishing fleet, while weaker protections for the sustainability of their fish stock has been introduced. These are all very worrying when we share neighbouring waters. At EU level, there are legal commitments to have ended overfishing by last year, but this has not been achieved. And we are committed to the EU Biodiversity Strategy target and our programme for government commitment to designate 30% of our marine area as marine protected areas. And that process is starting. And Minister, as you'll know, a marine protected area doesn't mean that you can't do anything in that area. It doesn't neutralise it. It just means that it's managed in a way that conserves that area and protects it. Through our Marine Planning Development Management Bill, we will be addressing how the ambitious and challenging development of large-scale offshore renewable energy will be managed, and this process needs to work closely with our fishers, especially on the Irish Sea, which would be the first place that work is carried out. The offshore renewable industry will create many jobs and bring economic benefit to our coastal communities, and ports like Wicklow and Arklow in my own constituency are ideal bases to serve the supply chain for the offshore industry. And there are opportunities for those in the fishing industry with such good local knowledge and experience to benefit, to become part of that supply chain, or to change skills and to work in that industry. And I think that's an area that we need to look at with people who are in the fishing industry. It's also important that there's good coordinated cooperation between the fishing community and the offshore developers when surveys or works or may temporarily prevent fishing within those areas where those works are going on. So, Minister, protecting and preserving our marine environment is the most important measure we can take to assist our fishing communities. Our marine environment is under serious and continuous threat and is very damaged. Marine biodiversity is in as much trouble as our terrestrial biodiversity. I asked environmental NGOs recently at our joint Oireachtas committee what has been the biggest negative impact on our marine environment, and their answer was clear: fishing. So, Minister, I'd ask that you urgently engage across all sectors of government to ensure that the establishment of the marine protected areas, marine environmental protection and conservation of marine species is carried out with the highest level of scientific expertise, that we take that advice and that we work in close consultation with all those stakeholders involved, particularly the fishing community, as well as environmental and community representatives. And I'd also ask that you assist with fishing representatives to engage with the offshore renewable energy industry so that there's good cooperation, benefit and understanding of the development that will take place over the next few years and the opportunities that that development will present. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Lasker.
I might just respond and thank Deputy Matthews for his contribution and his insight into the issue and the future of our fishing sector. And I think I would certainly concur that there is a very sustainable and healthy future for our fishing sector. We have to work. This has been a significant moment. Obviously, we've had Brexit hanging over us for the last 3-4 years at this stage, and all of the damage that it could potentially do. And while the worst impacts of it certainly were avoided. Thankfully, there has been an impact which we have to work with the sector to adjust to, and then help it to grow and be a strong, sustainable livelihood and sector into the future. I acknowledge the Deputy Matthews' contribution and remarks in relation to how we can do that.
Thank you. Deputy Christopher O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Last Concorla. Look, at the outset, Minister, you have acknowledged the impact that the Brexit deal will have on the fishing sector. The Taoiseach himself has acknowledged the severe impact that it will have, and it will indeed have a severe impact on fishing communities right around Ireland. And because many aspects of it are unfair, and if you just look at a species like mackerel and the quota share there and the amount of quota that has been given back to the UK in terms of mackerel, if you look at Ireland, it's a 26% share thereabouts. Spain is only giving back 0.02% in terms of mackerel, and Denmark it's 0.8%. So if you look at those percentages straight away, you can see that Ireland is unfairly burdened and severely impacted by that Brexit deal. So it's very important now that we react, because businesses will close, jobs will be lost. So I'm delighted, actually, at the outset. I did put in a request to you last week to set up a specific task force to deal with the impact of Brexit on the fishing industry. And I'm delighted to hear at the outset that you've acknowledged that and that you will set up a task force. So my first question for you, Minister, is when will that task force be set up, and who will make up that task force? Because I feel it's very important that it includes the fishermen and women of Ireland, the POs, the fish producers, and all relevant industry stakeholders. So if you could just develop on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan, for your contribution, and also I want to acknowledge the tremendous work you have done and engagement you've had with me as Minister for the Marine since from the outset, right in the run-up to Brexit, representing the interests of fishermen. I know, like my own county, Cork South West in particular, is a constituency very much impacted, and where fisheries is very important and significant to. And both in the run-up to Brexit and indeed since that, you've taken a very constructive approach in championing the sector and defending it and trying to ensure that the outcome from Brexit was as positive as it could possibly be. I know in recent days we've had engagement in relation to the idea around a task force, which was an approach which I was very open to and considering. I've also discussed with many in the sector how that is a valuable and constructive way to go forward, and I want to acknowledge your role in relation to pushing that. And certainly over the coming days now I will be engaging with the sector in relation to the composition of that and the full terms of reference, and outlining those between over the next week to 10 days to ensure that it is got up and running, because essential to how we go forward really is the views of the sector, of fishermen, of coastal communities, and in the same way that I took the approach in advance of Brexit of working very closely with them in terms of the outcome of it now, I intend to work very closely with them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and I appreciate that response and clarity, and I look forward to seeing the makeup of that task force. But look, establishing that task force and other steps, there are still opportunities to try redress the unfairness and the imbalance there. The £1 billion Brexit Impact Fund is a huge opportunity. I think it's vitally important that the fishing sector get a fair share of that impact fund. And also, and I guess this is a further question, there has to be opportunities there in terms of other species. We mentioned mackerel, and I think that really has to be looked at again. But in other species, you mentioned hake, haddock, monk. It's my understanding, and I've been told about figures, that some of the EU nations, such as France, aren't catching their full TAC in some of those species. And I think it's very important that we go back, we look at those figures, and we see where there's wriggle room for the Irish fleet to be able to increase their quota without increasing the overall TAC, because obviously protection of the fish stock and species is very important as well. So if you could just develop on that, please, Minister.
Thanks, Deputy O'Sullivan. Any option or idea certainly will be fully explored. My objective as Minister is to try and ensure that our sector is as strong as it possibly can be at European level, that we have a strong a quota across our various species, and in particular to address the outcome that we've seen from Brexit. So certainly any ideas or suggestions there is, and I'm working closely with the sector around this, I will be fully exploring and taking forward, because ultimately our objective is to ensure that the fishermen have the fish to catch, while at the same time recognising that they're going to have to be supported to address what is an inevitable outcome from Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Moment we're moving on. I think the speaker down for Sinn Féin, Martin Kenny, is unavoidably not here. So Social Democrats, I beg your pardon. Yes, Deputy MacLochlainn.
I've just been informed as the Sinn Féin party whip. Yeah, no. I'm asking. Just with respect, last quarter, we are working under restricted conditions.
I'm asking what? Sorry, I'm trying to hurry things up to keep within the time. Is your request to speak instead of Martin Kenny?
Yes, it is.
Yes,
yeah.
your request is granted.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Laska. I really appreciate that, last quarter, in the exceptional circumstances. Thank you very much, Minister. I want to join you in paying my condolences to the family and friends of Hugo Boyle. As you know, Hugo was a Donegal man, but he was a very important man to fishers all across the island, and particularly in the south and west. PO, where he was, of course, the chief executive, and I've seen some very moving tributes to him. So I want to join you in paying tribute to Hugo. Now, in terms of the issue of licences, Minister, and I appreciate that you did listen to the concerns of fishers and you've made steps in the right direction in designating more ports. But the difficulty is this, is that the European Commission would have notified your department last year, plenty of time, that there was an issue here around designation. The Fish Producers Organisation in the north of Ireland, the NIFPO, would have corresponded with your department and would have asked them around this issue. So there was plenty of notice that there was going to be a problem. And right now, there are still affected fishers. For example, Dunmore East will need to be designated. There is a substantial fishery. Obviously, they're the closest in terms of some of the waters off the UK. There are numerous vessels that would land there with UK licences every year. It would have a real impact there. Due to the ill health of Hugo Boyle, I assume this issue mightn't have been raised as forcefully if it had his health been, with him. So I think that may have been an oversight, in fairness, but I'm asking you to address it. Also, there are piers like Mallinhead, Ballyworski, Maharorty in Donegal that I think should be added. I'm also disappointed, frankly, that the SFPA officers seem to have controlled the time windows available. It's Monday to Friday. Now, you can't ask fishers to just fish a 5-day week. I mean, they fish on weather conditions. You could have tremendous weather on a Saturday and Sunday where they're forced to go out and fish. And, there needs to be a review of those time windows. We need to respect that the industry has to work with the weather. And we don't know what the weather is going to be in any day of the week. So I think it's unreasonable to limit people to a Monday to Friday. I say all of that while giving you considerable credit for fighting the case. It showed a message to fishers that there was somebody willing to challenge those in authority in the Department of Marine. So credit is given to you for your effort, but more needs to be done. And I ask you to review that and take representations from fishers. Thank you, Minister.
Brief response.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy MacLochlainn, and thank you for your acknowledgement as well in relation to the efforts that we have gone to try and accommodate this. And I'll be the very first to accept that it doesn't fully address and that we cannot, unfortunately, go back to the situation that pertained beforehand and the access arrangements that were in place. And unfortunately, it's a result of what's happened with Brexit and the radical change that has made to the relationship between Britain and Ireland, and then also in terms of the fisheries policy from the UK fisheries policy to the common fisheries policy. I did put great effort and detail working with my team into assessing this. I looked particularly at what the landing pattern was and to try and ensure that there's a geographic spread in terms of the designation. So about half of the national landings of Northern Irish registered boats into the Republic would be in Donegal, for example.
Minister.
So there's 4 out of the 7 that are in Donegal, and also Rossaveel and Howth. Other areas had much lower landing figures. That's why they weren't designated. But I will keep it under review as time progresses, and my ears are certainly open to the challenge.
Perhaps a written reply could go to cover the details of it. Moving on to Deputy Holly Cairns.
Thanks, Lascia and Corla. First of all, Minister, I'd like to commend you on your engagement with the industry so far. I think it's quite rare with big issues like this that when you're engaging with stakeholders, they've had so much correspondence with the Minister, so I hope you keep it up and I commend you for it. We're all aware of the considerable concerns in the fishing sector with the Brexit agreement, seeing a total loss of 43 million, with Ireland surrendering a greater percentage of quota than most EU states. We need reassurance for coastal and island communities that you're going to put in place schemes to support those who need it the most. I have a number of items to raise and I'll give you time to respond afterwards, if that's okay. Firstly, the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund is a crucial support for sustainable fishing and the economic development of coastal areas. Its predecessor has proven vital in fostering innovations to develop sustainable markets for small-scale and island fishing communities to stay alive. I'm wondering, when will the text of the new scheme be available to you and other stakeholders, and will you provide stopgap investments for current projects, like the government's doing with the LEADER programme at the moment? Secondly, there are ongoing issues around the designation of ports for landing of UK-registered Northern Irish boats. The excessive re-registering costs are simply not an option for many. I'm sure you know that. Also, the 24-hour notice for landing is simply unworkable for a lot of people. So can you ensure the further designation of ports to those already announced, and will you use exemptions to notice periods until fishers have had a chance to adapt to the new arrangements? Next, in relation to quotas and decommissioning, with the loss of 15% of our quotas, I'm wondering, do you plan to address this loss? And is there plans to establish a decommission scheme? I know previous schemes have been at the cost often of small scale and inshore fishing. It's the type of fishing we need to promote. And it has been to the advantage of larger and commercial fishing. I think it's really important that any potential decommissioning scheme needs to prevent this inequity going forward and not allow the sector to become dominated by a small number of big players. Finally, so many of these issues can be connected with how decisions are made and whose interests are being prioritised. For many small-scale fishermen and women, it can feel like the government is working against them rather than fighting for them. Certainly in successive governments, I hope that will change. They represent the type of sustainable fishing that has been practiced for generations in West Cork and other coastal and island communities. However, successive governments have focused on the larger, more lucrative, and when I say more lucrative, I mean more lucrative for the few, not the many, and the more damaging types of fishing. So it's essential that you facilitate granting of PO status to small-scale representative groups to better reflect all of the different types of businesses, family business, island and coastal communities, who are often overshadowed by the larger players. Ireland has a diverse coastline with different requirements at regional level. Minister, can you please assure the organisations that are seeking producer organisation status that you and your officials will proactively work with them to ensure this? Their voices need to be heard at this crucial time for the industry. Currently, many are feeling frustrated and held up by bureaucratic technicalities. The department should be out there working with them to meet requirements. That's the type of department fishing communities need. Can you make it happen in relation to producer organisations? If you could prioritise that question, it would be great.
Straight up. Minute and a half.
First of all, just thank you, Deputy Cairns, for your contribution and overview of the challenges. On your last point, first of all, in relation to PO status for smaller groups, I certainly will be working with them and trying to facilitate where appropriate. I recently met with the Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation, which I know have an application live and represent about 40 various vessels, and certainly I'm working with them. But also, I think it is important that we can facilitate producer organisations are a really important way to ensure fishermen are represented and engaged with government as well. On the point regarding re-registering of Northern Irish boats, you'll have heard my contribution earlier on in relation to that. Unfortunately, Brexit has radically altered the legal position between Britain and, in particular, and the EU, and also the particular arrangements that are in place now for Northern Ireland. Particularly, there's issues there and a totally altered legal situation now between the UK Common Fisheries Policy and the EU Common Fisheries Policy. So I certainly. So in order to designate any port, there has to be a significant regulatory oversight available to do that. I've been working closely with SFPA and doing the best that has been possible, given resources is there, to accommodate the designation of 7 ports now, where it was 2 before. Though, unfortunately, do away with the additional red tape and administration that is going to come with that designation. There is going to be, for example, that 4-hour notice period. That's a requirement under IUU and NEFC regulations, and also the need, for example, for a catch certificate from the Northern Irish authorities for that catch to be landed. So there's still real challenges there. But certainly, as Minister, I was keen to do all I could to try and facilitate them within reason.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
So, Anish, Ó Cuiv TD.
Margaret, and first of all, Minister, I'd like to thank you for the move you made in facilitating fishermen with northern registered boats at the ports. But it is very restrictive. It's Monday, Friday, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. in Howth and Russellville, and it's much more restrictive, as you know, in your own county. Is there any way of facilitating, particularly fishermen who need to land at the weekends, to get the markets early in the week, in other words, the Tuesday market, and they want to put them fresh in the market? That's an issue that has been raised with me, and it seems to me to be a valid issue. And I'm sure some arrangement could be made with the SFPA. Now, I know in Russellville, for example, there are staff of the SFPA there every 7 days a week or so, I'm told. So I was wondering, could something further be done on that? I do recognise that there was movement, but I think we have to go a little bit more. We want to get back as near as we had it before. We can't go back there fully because there are checks to be carried out, but maybe there could be some movement on that one. That's my first question. Will I give all the questions together?
Yeah, whatever way you wish, Deputy Queen.
Okay. My second question is...
As long as you leave enough time for the answers.
I'll try to, yeah. You might stop the clock too. The second question is, there's a perfect storm there at the moment for the shellfish sector. You've got COVID, you've got Brexit, you've got all the problems getting goods in and out. And my understanding is that particularly with oysters, farmed oysters, the price has literally gone through the floor. Some other shellfish are not as badly affected, but I was wondering, is there any plan to give assistance to that sector? Because unfortunately, again, for whatever reason, the Department of Finance didn't seem fit to include them in the CRSS scheme, so they don't even get their overheads, not to mind the fact that they're holding stock that is very difficult to sell at any margin. I have some prices, for example, for our oysters, it's quite scary to drop in the price. The third issue is consultation of the small amount we're going to have left to give out. You have the Quota Management Advisory Committee. You have 1,998 boats registered. The vast majority of people work in the inshore fleet. But the producer groups, the producer organisations have 4 representatives on that. I understand 80% of the boats are inshore. They have 1 representative. Would you think of increasing the representation for the vast number of inshore fisher people? It shouldn't be done by the output of the boat. It should be done by the number of people engaged in the industry. And the final question, and I'd like to thank you again for a parliamentary reply, and time is tight. In your reply, you said that the common fishery policy is renegotiated every 10 years. Now, you did give me a warning that it's majority rule, but of course a lot of countries don't have big stakes in North Atlantic fishing. You also told me in a parliamentary reply that our share of the fishing waters has gone from 10% to 12%, even though we're the country with Germany that lost the biggest percentage of quota. So the amount of water we have proportionally has gone up, and we've done very badly on the quota. Minister, it's not a question of success or failure. It's a question of trying. Can you guarantee me in those negotiations that you will bang the table hard and that you will outline absolutely clearly the historic injustice done to this country in the common fishery policy, and that Ireland will keep shouting about this and the injustice of this until justice is done. I remember being very impressed at a European Council meeting I attended. It was an arts meeting as it happened. And the Greeks were still giving out about artefacts that had been stolen from them in the 19th century, long before the EU existed. And eventually that issue got on the agenda. So I think it's time we started banging the table. And there's an old saying, the crying baby gets the bottle. We started wailing in relation to the injustice of fishing.
Minister, you've been left 3.5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Laskin Corlin. Thank you, Deputy Ó Cuiv, for your commentary and overview and assessment, and also for your engagement over the last period of time as well in relation to fisheries issues, and in particular in relation to Rossavila in recent times too. You mentioned that, first of all, in relation to the designation, certainly up until Christmas Eve it wasn't clear whether Northern Irish registered vessels would actually be able to fish in Irish waters. And as you know, it was widely reported that there was a 50% chance of a Brexit deal. Thankfully, we had one on Christmas Eve. That meant that those boats would be able to continue to fish in Irish waters, but it did crystallise the issue in relation to access to ports, and also crystallise the types of designation and requirements that would be in place in relation to vessels. Subsequently, in terms of significant engagement with my department and the SFPA, we have put in place arrangements to try and accommodate those vessels. I will keep those under review, but we have to work, Deputy Ó Cuiv, within the resources and the capacity that's available as well. And I did point out previously as well the additional significant challenges in terms of which are unavoidable. It's important to point that out, and I know those fishermen will be making sure and putting preparations in place between now and the start of February to be as prepared as they can be to ensure that they're able to work with that. In relation to the shellfish sector and oyster price in particular, last autumn I did launch a fund and compensation package for the shellfish sector to try and help our oyster fishermen to address what had been a very difficult and challenging year last year. And I know that was very much welcomed, particularly by the FA Aquaculture Committee, who had lobbied strongly for it, as well as the many fishermen and oyster fishermen in particular within the sector who had that challenging year and mid representations. I will continue to monitor the situation over the time ahead as well. In relation to they have been able to avail of the wage subsidy scheme, Deputy Ó Cuiv, which I know has been very valuable to many of them and really important, and has been acknowledged by many of them to me as being important to them. But I certainly will continue to engage very closely with the sector in relation to the pressure that they are under. With regard to the Quota Management Committee, that's something hasn't been. It's not a proposal that has been put to me, but any proposal I get, I certainly will. I will consider it's important that we do have, and I very much value engagement with the sector, engagement with fishermen in terms of how quotas are allocated. I very much value the role of the Quota Management Committee. There are many different views within the fisheries sector itself in terms of how quotas should be allocated, for example, when it should be allocated, and that Quota Management Committee is really important in relation to bringing people together to try and provide appropriate advice to the Minister. In relation to fishing waters and our quota situation, I can assure you I will be advocating in every way possible, Deputy Ó Cuiv, at European level over the time ahead, and certainly in relation to the review of the Common Fisheries Policy, in terms of putting Ireland's position forward, in terms of putting forward the tremendous resource we bring to the Common Fisheries Policy, and the fact that should be reflected in relation to the way that and the allocations that we receive, and fighting in every way I can. You do know, of course, that everybody else will be fighting the same, and as you say yourself, success is never guaranteed. But I can assure you that we will be going there with all our capacity and all our effort and all our powers to try and ensure the best possible outcome for our country.
Oireachtas Sinn Féin, Deputy Mairead Farrell, 3.5
minutes. Ní múna sásta tá locht íscrochta na tíre seo faoin dream láva tá tucaí rob a ríist eile. Agus chuirma fáilte mhór ribh an gcin a Rossavila ananú cheann na Chalafort ag amach bád ó na sné chundé agus an mratan an teachtasteach agus éisce chuir dír. Ní rá cíal ná réasún leis an gcine gan ligins de íscrí a méid seo dhéine agus mar sin is cóir dearfach é an dulchan cín cíalhar seo seo. Cahamud in eissiocht a chinú go Chalafort Rossaville agus Chalafort Downwara Herbert an sin agus ara impimart galún se hórgom an seo anjo gníon fer sin agus gúiltear an glór Ibra ad. A aras mínlam freisin de orge harings cheisna wanan leis an mank porcupine atá mos in Atlanta ó Rossaville. Tun táver seo ina chráb Spáine ag iascrí an íorthar faoi láthair agus muidig play na ceiste seo injo níl in chead ag bád áitiú le mank porcupine bíoch is nar cháil bád na bratan a fiús bótaháin agus iad mó snam a láthair ag trálareacht lob. Agus ara an féidir leat míú dún cén chuí godorlóch se seo go mar bád áitiú le ceanglí le céimh. The fishing community are outraged, and rightly so, at how they have once again been left behind and forgotten. And I was glad to see that Rossaville was designated as a port that would allow for northern and British fishing boats land their catch. The previous decision not to allow this was ludicrous, and it was good that the sensible decision has been reached. And we need to now urgently invest properly in Rossaville and urgently act on the development of a deep water quay. And Minister, I am asking you to commit to that here now. Ara, I also want to raise with you the very concerning issue of the Porcupine Bank off Rossaville. I've had fishers on to me about this issue, and at this very moment in time, while we are discussing this, the Porcupine Bank is closed to local boats, while British boats did not lose a single prawn quota and are out trawling for prawn now. Minister, can you please clarify how this can happen? The local boats are currently tied up. And another issue of great concern comes from those who fish pelagics. They have lost a huge percentage from the quota, far more than other countries, and this is crippling the fishing community, and it does affect an entire community. This isn't just the fishers themselves, but it goes into the local shop, the people that fix the boats, and every element of the local economy. And we are looking for a renegotiation of the common fisheries policy to get a much better deal for Irish fishing communities. Can you commit to that?
To answer all of those.
Thank you. First of all, in relation to the Rossaville deputy, I'm very much aware of the issue. It's something Deputy Ó Cuiv has raised with me on several occasions and is constantly pushing as well, and something I will continue to assess. In relation to the Porcupine Bank, that's something I fought very hard for at the last EU Fisheries Council meeting in December, and it's something we will be returning to now at the next EU Council meeting, and I certainly am hoping that we will have additional quota there between now and the end of March to increase our fisheries, or prawn fishery in the Porcupine Bank. In relation to the Common Fishery Policy, Deputy, I have clearly outlined that I'll be forthrightly putting forward the Irish national position in relation to that. It's always a challenging review, and every country bats, and you can be sure I will be doing all I can, and in particular in relation to the outcome of Brexit as well, and the impact that will have on our quota, making sure that is taken into account and made clear.
Thank you. Solidarity People Before Profit, Deputy Paul Murphy, 5 minutes.
Very much, Las Ceann Comhairle. First of all, Minister, it's good to see that you're recovered from coronavirus, and congratulations are also in order. I think you're now the longest serving Minister for Agriculture in this government, so congratulations. I have a number of questions which actually relate to COVID and the Minister's department, which I accept you won't necessarily have all the information in front of you, but we don't have other avenues in terms of oral questions and so on. So perhaps you can give what information you have and then respond in writing. One question relates to the negotiations you reported previously about sick pay entitlements for meat factory workers. In September, you said those negotiations were ongoing. You have a particular responsibility for these factories, which, as you know, have been a major source of COVID outbreaks. And one of the major problems revealed last year by the unions and the workers was the fact that most workers have no entitlement to sick pay. Very low-paid workers who simply could not afford to go without pay, meaning that many felt unwell and still went to work, spreading the virus. It is scandalous that there's no requirement on employers to pay sick pay, and that the government is still dragging its heels on this. So I just ask the Minister for an update on this and whether the government will intervene to ensure that all meat factory workers have a right to sick pay. I think that the least that can be done is to ensure a sick pay right for all workers and help stop the spread of the virus. Second question relates to the issue of COVID officers in workplaces, for example, in the meat factories, where, again, I've heard of cases of the COVID officers being handpicked by the employers and being seen, therefore, as an extension of management. Instead of this self-regulation, will you agree and insist that every meat factory should have its own workers' health and safety committee elected by the workers themselves? And will you ensure that trade unions are allowed access to these workplaces, as is the case in New Zealand and elsewhere? Thirdly, a related question, which is about workers who have effectively tied accommodation to their employers. I've been informed of one worker who spoke up about conditions in a meat factory, including on social media, and as a result the employer didn't sack him because then he could take out an unfair dismissals case. Instead, he kicked him out of his accommodation. For many working in the meat factories and in other big agricultural companies, such as Keelings, the boss is not just their employer but their landlord, and they're currently exempted from the eviction ban. So will the government take action to resolve that? And finally, a question, and again, if you don't have the information, I understand, you might come back to me in writing, but it's about Cheltenham, which obviously was a feature last year in the spread of COVID, and I presume everybody would accept that it was, a contributing factor to the spread of the virus or the speed of the spread. But as I understand it, 350 Irish jockeys, trainers and grooms are preparing to go to Cheltenham this year. Many of them may be in receipt of funds from Horse Racing Ireland, which in turn gets funds from the state. Not to mention those who may, I would really advise against it, but be intending to go to be there at Cheltenham, and just whether the department and the minister is planning to do anything about that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Deputy Murphy, for your wholehearted good wishes and congratulations as well. Obviously, I know the topic today is on fisheries and Brexit, and I know it's probably not a big issue in your own constituency, and hence your focus on other issues today. Certainly, you've raised a number of issues across your contribution there, and I certainly will, after the session, ensure that there is a written response provided to you on the issues that you've raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy, 40 seconds left if you want. No, okay, moving on, so thank you. Moving on, the next Deputy Dara Calleary.
Garmagad Laskin Curler. Firstly, I want to be associated with the Minister's tribute to the late Hugo Boyle, who resided in Achill. He was very much part of the very fine tradition between Achill and Donegal, particularly in our fishing community, but across all communities. And I extend my sympathies to his wife and daughters and his wider family. He was an exemplary servant of the Irish fishing industry all his life. Minister, this is an incredibly complex time for Irish fisheries, and you've given it absolutely everything so far in your ministry in terms of the challenge faced by Brexit, but also by COVID, which is it is in many ways the perfect storm. And I welcome the commitment you gave to Deputy Christopher O'Sullivan earlier in relation to the establishment of a task force. And I'd like you to outline some of its modus operandi and what you see as its terms of reference. I think it needs to have a short and sharp terms of reference, a short and sharp life scale or lifetime. I think everybody knows the problems, but it's important that you involve people in industry in terms of the solutions. So I'd like your thoughts on that. Secondly, you gave me a response to a PQ last night, and you outlined that through the Brexit Adjustment Reserve, there will be €1 billion available to Ireland in 2021 to cover potential 2021 and 2022 expenditure. What do you envisage, or have you any kind of quota within that figure that may go to fishing and may go to the fishing sector in particular? Because I think since 2016 there has been the fear of the consequences of Brexit, with the consequences of COVID, and whilst the worst fears, and I think many deputies today have been observing this debate, have very simplistic views on this. It's incredibly complex. It's incredibly challenging. And I think we're doing a disservice to the fishing community to present it as something simplistic and something that can be easily resolved when it can't. But when we have things in our own control, such as the €1 billion, which are around the cabinet table, that's where you need the task force, Minister. And just kind of your general thoughts, obviously without it's too early to have too much detail, but your general thoughts in the direction of that for fishing. I agree with Deputy Ó Cuiv in terms of the inshore fishing community. They're often forgotten, but they're a very important part of it in terms of their engagement in the industry, in terms of the impact of COVID on that industry, in terms of the impact of Brexit on that industry, and that they do need a separate investment programme for fleet, for infrastructure, to assist and to allow them to get through this challenge and to grow into a niche that may be available for them as well. So I would encourage you around that. And finally, Minister, we seem to have taken the biggest hit in terms of quota, particularly in mackerel. What are the plans or what are the chances of quota rebalancing within the short term? Renegotiating the fisheries policy, and that is probably a more medium term and won't produce the kind of results that we need. But in terms of where we find ourselves in the context of the agreement on Christmas Eve and where the fishing industry finds ourselves, is there any openness or willingness as a response to the Irish situation to adjust quota reserve across the countries that matter? Minister, I had the honour of being in your department for a short time, and my engagement with the fishing community was short, but this is a very focused group of people who have great ambitions, but are faced with very, very big challenges. As I said, Brexit, COVID, also climate change, which are not in the long term, they're immediate. And your response, and you have all of our support, your response will shape the future of the industry for many generations to come.
Minister.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, and thank you, Deputy Cleary, for your very considered and thoughtful insight into the challenge facing the fishing sector, and in particular to how the challenges and the difficulties that it has had to navigate over the last number of months, and indeed the important juncture that we're at in terms of ensuring that we have a strong, sustainable and healthy fishing sector and industry into the future. I know you'd also join with me, Deputy, given the challenging times that there's been, and particularly given the timing of Brexit, in acknowledging the effort and commitment that there's been among the staff in the Department of Marine and indeed Department of Agriculture to deal with these very challenging issues. I know you worked exceptionally well with them and with great commitment and with great passion and understanding before. And certainly, given the Brexit deal on Christmas Eve and its timing, all of the commitment and work and effort that was involved in the run-up to that, and all of the work that was involved right after the deal. So, for example, even on New Year's Eve, very late on New Year's Eve, I put a call into to fisheries officials in the Department of Marine to thank them for having worked all day New Year's Eve up until late that night to get out the authorisations that were necessary for our vessels to be able to fish the next day. And that's the type of commitment that often is not acknowledged, and I know it's one that you certainly would second, and it's important that is clear. In terms of some of the issues that you outlined there, the task force, and I think I welcome your acknowledgement of it as a very constructive way to go forward. I agree with you in terms of the importance of it having a prompt turnaround time. We do have a window now between now and the end of March where there's clarity around quotas, given the agreement at the December Fish Council meeting. But there is going to be an impact after that in terms of the outcome from Brexit and the adjustments. But I'm very much, it's very important that is informed by those who are in the fisheries sector and by those who are affected by it. And the terms of reference, certainly, which I'm considering at the moment, will be framed around ensuring they have a clear and direct input into framing the way we go forward in the short term, and also ensuring a healthy long-term future for our fishing sector post-Brexit. In relation to the Brexit Adjustment Reserve, we're getting a 25% allocation at European level of the total allocation so far, which I think is a very, very strong outcome, national outcome in terms of financial allocation. But it's going to take more than that. And there is a clear government commitment there, in particular in relation to the fisheries and marine sector, to actually invest in it and to support it in the time ahead. The Brexit Adjustment Reserve funding will be welcome, but national funding will be forthcoming to support them to adjust and to grow and to sustain employment in a post-Brexit scenario. In relation to quota rebalancing, I've been very, very clear as recently as yesterday morning in my meeting with Commissioner Sinavikias and the chairman of the negotiation task force, Michel Barnier, in terms of leaving no one in any doubt as to the unfair burden that there is in Ireland as a result of the outcome of Brexit from a fisheries point of view. We were always going to be the nation, whether it be fisheries or other parts of our economy, who were going to be most impacted and most at risk from Brexit. And you know, it has left, and unfortunately, it has been the case, despite the best possible national effort, that there is an impact in our sector. And certainly, I will be working at European level to try and find constructive solutions to address that.
Thank you very much, Minister. We move to our next contributor, Deputy Johnny Mythen, please.
Before I begin, I would like to put on record to commend the tremendous work my former colleague MEP Lena Reid did for the Irish fishing industry during her tenure. There is no doubt, Minister, that Brexit, as the saying goes, was neither good for man nor beast, but in this case neither good for fishermen nor Irish fresh fish stocks. I have met with inshore and offshore fishermen in my own county, particularly the Kilmore fishermen. They feel completely let down and say once again they are being used as a sacrificial pawns on the chessboard of the Brexit EU negotiations. The loss of 15% of the total quota of fish means an estimated loss of approximately 43 million over the next 5 years. This will have a huge effect on the fishing communities and will inevitably cause job losses and the depletion of Irish fishing vessels. It is also a loss of a natural resource that rightfully belongs to the Irish people. Their backs are being put literally to the harbour walls. They don't want to see their boats decommissioned. They simply want to fish as they have done for generations. I would like to ask the Minister, was there any solutions put forward to counteract the loss of quotas for the Irish fleet, particularly to mackerel and herring, and if so, what were they? In the upcoming EU Fishing Council meeting, what solutions will the Minister and the Government be bringing forward now? And what proposals are in place of the upcoming review of the CFP and a 15% drop in quotas? And will a support package be put in place to compensate Irish lobster catchers to shield them from any new surge of US tariff-free imports?
Minister.
Thank you, Concordia, and thank you, Deputy Mythen, for your comments. In relation to quota share, as you'll have heard from my previous contributions, it is something I have been taking up at EU level with my colleagues and with the Commission, and will continue to do so. And will be seeking constructive approaches in relation to how the fact that there is an additional burden on Ireland in terms of the outcome from the trade and cooperation agreement, and to try and look at methods as to how we might mitigate that. In relation to your final point in relation to tariffs, and particularly in relation to lobster, I want to welcome, I think, the inauguration of President Biden yesterday, and certainly I look forward to working with the new administration there and engaging with them in the time ahead. There has been a somewhat strained relationship in recent times, which has had significant tariff implications in our agri-food and our beverage sector. And I hope that the advent of a new administration there will offer an opportunity to hopefully address some of those, and to ensure a freer trading and healthy trading relationship between ourselves and the US, and the addressing of some of the working to address some of the barriers that we've seen applied in recent times.
Thank you, Minister. Are we to take it that President Biden is partial to a bit of lobster?
Young Carla.
Are you finished, Deputy Mythen? You are?
Eating.
EU fisheries, yes.
Yeah.
Briefly
what proposals are in place on the upcoming review of the CFP and the 15% drop in quotas?
All right, thank you. Minister, briefly, please.
Yeah, so in relation to the review of the Common Fisheries Policy, it is to be completed by the end of next year, Deputy Mythen, and certainly the engagement on that will be starting later this year. But in the short term, in terms of the impact and the result from Brexit, my priority will be to ensure that that is clearly made clear at European level, the impact and the burden that Ireland is taking in that, and seeking to have that, looking for constructive ways in which we can have that addressed, working with the EU Commission.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, Deputy Peadar Toibín, please.
Gurmila Mahagat, Cairns TD, and I'm going to address the issue of fishing, Minister. But just while I have your ear, I just might raise one other issue too. Are you aware, Minister, that there's been a number of serious allegations made in relation to VAT fraud, insurance fraud, illegal state aid, environmental fraud and corruption in the poultry industry? Éamon Ó from County Cavan has stated that his business, which had a turnover of about €2 million, has been put out of business due to his refusal to participate in what he calls an illegal VAT practice. He claims that Revenue are aware of the practice. He claims that it's costing the state millions of euros in tax foregone. He claims that he and others were told to deregister for VAT by a food processor and to start operating under a flat rate VAT system. He claims that he was to pay a higher than the market rate for feed, and while at the same time he would get a higher price for the chickens that he sold. Now, this issue made it onto the Economic Monetary Affairs Committee in 2016, and the Minister for Finance at the time, Michael Noonan, admitted, and I quote, "VAT avoidance schemes were being developed and probably in place, particularly in the poultry sector." Michael Noonan then went on to state that he was going to introduce into the Finance Bill to deal with this, and again, quote the former Minister, "tax evasion in the poultry industry that gave competitive advantages to those who used it rather to those who didn't."
Is this related to Brexit, Deputy?
I'm going to bring it to an end here, Cairns TD. Given how serious this is, will you meet with Éamon Ó and other campaigners to see can we find a resolution in this, Minister? Can I maybe just address that question?
I think Deputy Tobin, it would be more appropriate if you were to write to me and put with the particular matters that you were stating. I don't think it's appropriate I would address it here on the floor of the House. Thank you.
I will indeed write, and I know the former ministers have had letters written to them in this regards. In relation to fishing, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney, has admitted that fishermen and fisherwomen will be very disappointed with the deal that was achieved with Britain regards fishing concessions. Now, as Minister responsible for the Marine, did you raise objections to the deal? And if so, where were those objections? Where did they materialise? What effect did they have?
I think, Deputy Tobin, obviously, from the very outset, all of us nationally and the fishing sector in particular were very concerned in relation to the potential impact that Brexit could have on the fisheries sector. You'll be very aware of how it was made to be at #1 priority by the British government in relation to seeking to take back fish quota and to reclaim their waters and all of the fish that is caught by non-EU fleet in their waters. And the approach taken was a resolute and strong one nationally, working with their sector domestically to ensure we spoke with one voice, and indeed to ensure that we spoke with one voice at European level, both in terms of myself working at political level with other EU fisheries members and the EU Commissioner, the Fisheries Commissioner, and likewise with the industry working with their compatriots or partners at UEFA level to ensure that the EU approach to the negotiations from a fisheries point of view was as strong as it possibly could be. And I think that was really instrumental in relation to ensuring that the worst excesses that Brexit could have reaped for fisheries was avoided, first of all in relation to a no-deal Brexit, and secondly in relation to pushing back at every opportunity in relation to the British demand for 100% of the fish caught in their waters by the EU fleet to be reallocated. And ultimately that was confined to 25%, which is damaging in itself, but certainly was an outcome that was very much achieved as a result of a very strong negotiating approach.
Deputy Gurmagad, I suppose, Minister, I asked, did you object to the elements in any ways, and how did that have a material outcome? I imagine that what you've given me there is a very long way of saying no, that there was no official objection made by you or the department or the government in relation to what Simon Coveney himself said is a very disappointing outcome. Ireland's coastal share of fish will shrink by at least 15% over the next 6 years. The mean reduction of fishing per EU member state is 9%. So again, Ireland's reduction is significantly surpasses what the average European reduction is. And in fact, Ireland's fishing industry is the joint highest loser with Germany. How was this allowed to occur? I understand it's very complex negotiations, so many balls in the air, but how was it that Ireland happened to be the country, along with Germany, who lost the most? And then just finally, the question here is, Sean O Donoghue, the chief executive of the Fishermen's Organisation, said that they would now only get 13% share. He said it is totally unfair for mackerel that they are spawned off the west coast of Ireland, 80% of them. We're now ending up with only a 13% share, and Britain has a 71% share. This is totally unacceptable, and we're not going to lie down and accept it. So how do you propose now, Minister, that we change this to make sure that we get a fairer breakdown of this in future?
Thank you, Deputy Minister. To conclude.
Thank you, Concorla. I think I made it clear, Deputy Toibín, in my first response, that we fought tooth and nail as a nation to ensure that there would be no loss of fish. That was what we were looking for. Obviously, the British government approach was that they wanted to take back 100% of the fish caught in EU waters. At all points across throughout the negotiation, our approach was hold tight, don't give. Unfortunately, when it came to the end, in order for a deal to happen, there was an outcome in relation to fish. Not on the scale of what it would have been from a fisheries point of view in a no-deal scenario where we would have lost access and to where we catch 1/3 of our fish in British waters, nor indeed on the scale that would have reaped very significant damage across the rest of our economy as well. So that was our clear position all along the way, to hold the strongest position and line possible.
Thank you, Minister.
Ultimately, it resulted in fish being the very last item to be agreed on, and which ultimately the deal hinged on, because
Thank you very much,
the very
Minister.
resolute
Time is
approach
up.
we took to it.
The next slot is a government slot, but I don't think there's anyone to take it. We go next to the Rural Independent Group, where Deputy Michael Collins is sharing with Deputy Richard O'Donoghue.
Thank you, Concord. I have statements and questions, but I've 2.5 minutes, so I don't have much time for it, and maybe the Minister can come back to me afterwards. Yesterday afternoon I spoke here on fisheries, and today I will repeat some of what I said, Minister, in case you didn't get the chance to hear it. I have been consistently calling on the Government, and especially you, Minister, to be straight with the fisheries sector and the public on why you effectively sold out the entire sector during Brexit negotiations. The latest analysis released by officials in the Department of Marine illustrates how out of touch you have been on this issue. The preliminary analysis now confirms that the transfer of quota shares from Ireland is a staggering 27% higher than the government initially announced. The official report indicates a total loss to Ireland fishermen of 43 million by 2026, with the mackerel sector, which is the most valuable to the Irish fleet, hardest hit, with a 26% cut in our quota share worth 28.6 million. Around 60% of this cut will emerge in 2021, so the impact will be felt immediately. Now, the questions I have in the short space I have, Minister, is what are the number of EU, non-Irish, UK and other coastal state vessels that have authorisation to fish in the biological sensitive area in the Celtic Sea off our west coast, Irish Sea and off our Donegal coast? And the second question is, how do you monitor what are the amounts of fish these vessels catch every day in Irish waters?
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Briefly.
Thank you, Deputy Collins. And as you'll be aware, if you've been listening to me over the last number of months and again today, our position at all times has been to defend the fishing sector and to defend it tooth and nail, because we very much value it. And it might be easy to stand up and present that as a sellout. Our approach was to ensure that it was prioritised, and the massive threat which, if you've been assessing the Brexit negotiation and how it evolved, indeed the Brexit debate from the outset in Britain, how they were emphasising they were coming after their fish and how it was their #1 priority, all times was defending our sector, and that was crucial in relation to ensuring that at the very end, Brexit fishing was the last item to be decided, because of the fact that we wouldn't give on it, and we were holding such a resolute line. The British were looking for 100% of the fish caught in British waters back. That was confined to 25%. and that's even after them having left the European Union now. And that was very hard. But there's no doubt.
All right, thank you, Minister. Time is up. I'm sorry, I have to go to Deputy Donoghue.
And one we are very committed to working with the sector to try and address.
Thanks, John Cawley. Minister, I hope you're not going to sell out the beef sector and the Irish farmers as you've just sold out the fisheries. I have huge concerns over the beef cattle averaging €3.75 per kg. This is well below the Teagasc break-even figure, which is €4.50. Are you aware that I'm aware that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and many of our people are working from home, but our farmers are working from home 365 days a year. However, beef farmers are a long way short of breaking even. Did you know that some farmers are using a percentage of their single farm payment for the production of cattle so they can stay in business and not for their families? I'm asking you today, Minister, what controls are you going to put in place to stop the cartel-like system that the factories are operating? I brought this up earlier on with the Taoiseach to bring it up to you. At the moment, when they're auditing the factories, they're using the figures at the end of the year for an average price. But if you audit the factories throughout the year, you will see that the feeder groups for those factories are getting the highest price. And people that are involved in the factories are the highest paid in the single farm payment. And they're getting the highest price for their cattle within the factory system. What are you going to do? When are you going to stand up and save the Irish farmers, the beef farmers? There is €5 billion put in place by the EU to support agriculture. After the UK left the EU, are Irish farmers first on the list to be compensated? Irish agriculture is constantly under threat by cheap imports coming in to the UK. What is put in place to safeguard the beef coming in from South America?
Minister, briefly, please.
Thank you. I know the questions are relating to beef, and that's perfectly good with me, Deputy. Can you? Is my microphone live? Is it?
The microphone is live. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're all supposed to wear a mask as much as we can, Deputy, and the microphone.
Well, let's not argue over masks, please, Minister. You're fine. Minister can continue, please.
But certainly, I know if you were paying attention to the budget last October, you'll have seen, Deputy, that I delivered an 11% increase in the agriculture budget for the year ahead based on the previous year. And that was so that we can ensure that many of the key schemes to our farming sector can continue at full capacity and at ongoing payments, and also so that there was an additional €79 million fresh funding as well allocated in order to develop a new environmental pilot scheme and new environmental measures. So I am very, very committed, as you will know, to developing and protecting the incomes of our beef sector, as indeed to working to support and to work with our fishermen as well. And certainly now in the time ahead, in terms of bringing additional transparency, for example, to the food supply chain and developing the National Food Ombudsman Office, which is a key programme for government.
All right, thank you, Minister.
And is something which I will bring forward over the course of this year.
Thank you very much. We go finally now to Deputy Thomas Pringle.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his responses. I would just like to start off by paying tribute saying to the Minister that his response has been good so far in terms of the UK registered vessels, and it's good to see that response there. I'm not sure whether another minister would have made that response and actually designating additional ports, but I am concerned that the designation was taking a very minimalist approach and designating the least amount of ports possible so that to get over the line, and that there will be additional ports required and additional ports used at all times, and particularly I would just mention in relation to North and Ashown, Kildare and Malin Head, where a lot of fishermen use those ports, and those waters, as you know, Minister, are dodgy waters and have to steam around to Greencastle to get in on board and get in with your catch and get in bad weather is very dodgy. And by designating Kildare or Malin Head or additional ports like that, they could be used and be used safely, and that would be very important. The one thing I would say is in relation to this whole fiasco that has got up in relation to the designation of ports and stuff like that there, you just wonder what the department has been doing over the whole 3 years that this whole Brexit deal has been negotiated and stuff like that there, what actually has been happening? When you see earlier on in the year where the department didn't have the complete list of boats that to register with the UK so that boats that could land in the UK. And they actually called out to fishermen to actually come forward and so that they could register them with the department, with the UK, so that they could land and fish in UK waters after Christmas. I mean, it beggars belief, really. Like, and then that the designation ports got up with ports and that there, and that whole row got up. And if the fishermen hadn't campaigned and done that, it would never have been sorted out. And that's the reality of the situation. So that's really worrying. And also then as well, in relation to the whole the mackerel and the cut in the mackerel quota, you know, as one fisherman from Killybegs actually said to me, and I have a quote here. It says, if mackerel had passports, they would be Irish, because that is where they are born and spend most of their lives. They only pass through UK waters to get into ours to spawn. And that's the reality of the situation. And what you could actually have done through the negotiations is you could have kept our mackerel quota to be caught in Irish waters, rather than tying it up to be caught in the Scottish waters and leaving it open to be the negotiation deal. And that's what actually happened. And I actually would dispute with you, Minister. I think possibly a no deal would have been a better outcome for fishermen, because they could have held on to their quota and actually caught their quota in Irish waters in terms of mackerel anyway. And so, you know, and that is the reality. So you say that you're going to go forward and campaign now on the mackerel and on the common fisheries policy, and I hope to God you do, because the fishing industry has been let down every time since we started negotiating to join the European Union.
Deputy Pringle, are you aware that your colleague is behind you there?
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Deputy Fitzmaurice. Thank you, Deputy Pringle.
Thanks. Just two quick questions, Minister. In light of the announcement today of 2% linear cut, which is going to affect small family farms around the country, where Britain isn't paying into the EU, the previous Taoiseach undertook that Ireland would fill the deficit or the gap. Are you going to do that, rather than letting farmers around this country, especially the low-income ones, have a 2% linear cut? And in relation to machinery being brought across, I've talked to hauliers that we should have 200 loads brought across at this stage of farm machinery I'm talking about, Minister, and they have 80 loads gone across because of bureaucracy and major problems at getting in tractors and different types of machinery. Could you address both of those issues, please? Thank you.
Minister, please.
Thank you. I'll take Deputy Fitzmaurice's points there first. As you know, in Pillar 1 payments, Deputy Fitzmaurice, it's 100% EU funded. There isn't any capacity.
Ireland said they were going to top it up.
There isn't any capacity for domestic funds to be allocated towards it.
Up.
But in terms of the overall EU budget, that has been increased in monetary terms, and also, as you know, as I pointed out previously, in the most recent national budget, I achieved an 11% increase from last year,
which was
really important overall. In relation to the machinery, that's an issue in terms of, at the moment, in terms of people making sure they have their paperwork, and the unfortunate many administrative burdens, additional administrative burdens as a result of Brexit, and it is challenging at the moment, and as those adjustments are made. To deal with Deputy Pringle's points in relation to the designation of ports, they were designated for illegal, unregulated, unreported IUU purposes and North East Atlantic Fisheries Commission purposes. There is oversight. There's staff infrastructure required to be able to oversee that, and certainly I did move to. There's now four in Donegal and 7 nationally, and unfortunately the times are restricted, and we have to work with the resources and the capacity that we have in that regard. It's something that I will continue to monitor, Deputy Pringle. In relation to what has the department been doing, you mentioned the authorisation for boats issue. As you'll know, unfortunately, the Brexit deal happened on Christmas Eve. It allowed a window of about a week. There was 3 years to prepare. There was 3 years of negotiations, but what the situation to pertain the actual outcome was on Christmas Eve. That made clear there was going to be authorisations required. And as I said to an earlier speaker, the staff in the Department of Marine were working up to late on New Year's Eve to actually get those authorisations out.
Thank you very much,
tremendous work within the time involved.
We need to conclude.
And in relation to the final point, in relation to a no deal being better for fishermen, I think we have to recognise, Deputy Pringle, 1/3 of our fish were caught in British waters. We discussed rockall and other areas and the importance of those fishing waters, for example, to our fleet. For example, our prawns on the east coast, or haddock, or monk or megrim. Where were they going to be caught if that was blocked off to our fishermen? And I think at least you are being consistent, because I do remember being in a debate in Highland Radio with yourself and Gregory Campbell of the DUP, where you're advocating in advance of the Brexit vote in the UK that they should go ahead and do Brexit. So at least you're actually being consistent now at this point in saying that you're...
All right, Minister, thank you. We've
run out of time. A no-deal outcome might have been preferable.
Thank you very much. And Dara Nishle, Shanti Sporok Mariauler, Kursi Talaviach, Mara agus Bia go hek sprat imacht.